Well, welcome back to the 100 Movements podcast. This is a place where we have conversations on movemental Christianity. It's our aim as 100 Movements to help shift the tracks of history from institutional to movemental Christianity in the West. We want the church to remember the forgotten ways of Jesus, recover her design as a movement, and reimagine how ordinary people can embody and extend the kingdom in every place and space. My name is Brian Johnson. I'll be one of your hosts, and I'm here today with Alan Hirsch, who is also one of the founders of 100 Movements. So we're going to kick off a new series. This will be our second series, and we're going to focus on the 6 elements of mDNA that Alan wrote about in The Forgotten Ways, which is the seminal work that we use to think about how the church captures mDNA, movemental DNA, to spur the church on toward movement. So we're going to explore those in the weeks to come, but today it's just me and Alan and all of you that are joining us wherever you are, just to get an overview of where mDNA came from. So, Alan, anything else you want to add before we jump in?
No, just it's great to be here. I never tire of this topic because it's kind of always kind of relevant. And so I feel, part of my role in the world is to be a custodian of these ideas and bring them into the world as best I can. So it's good to be here, brother.
Yeah, I never tire of it either. I've heard you talk about this many times.
You can finish my sentences.
Almost, almost. I was actually just talking with a friend today about The Forgotten Ways, and I think I read The Forgotten Ways in 2009, 2010, and it took me months to get through. But after working to embody these elements in the ministries that we've led over the past 15 years or so, I went back and read it last year, and I wouldn't say I breezed through it, but I went through it a lot faster. And it's like it takes a while for you to re-paradigm and to embody them. But when you do, it's like this is the ocean I want to swim in.
Wow.
This is the water I want to be formed in.
Yeah, it's like a red pill.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go back to the beginning though. I mean, the book came out, was it '06 or '08?
Oh, oh, 06, yeah.
'06. And so, The Forgotten Ways is the book that really has these 6 elements in there. And you've taught on these for about 2 decades now. But before we get into each of those elements, just take us back to the beginning. Talk us through, where it came from. What was like the moment you were like, I see this and movements
Mm,
of Christianity,
mm,
and it's like, this is what we need to
mm,
return to. What's the origin story, if you will?
mm. That was a very different moment, by the way. I can still remember clearly when it downloaded, and it was like I'd asked the question for 3 years every day, which I'm going to explain now. How did they do this? And it was every day, and I just got it like a download, and it was like this kind of thunderstorm rain, and I was a little teacup trying to kind of get the rain in. It was just like a phenomenal moment where I felt it was revealed to me, and it was given to me to steward into the world. So yeah, so my journey towards the Forgotten Ways itself was started at a conference when I was listening to a speaker, and he was riffing on the Rodney Stark's Rise of Christianity, a kind of seminal book at the time about early Christianity. And he asked the question, how does the early church grow from as little as 25,000 in year 100 AD, so 70 years after the death and resurrection of the Lord? How does it grow to upwards to 20 million 200 years later, 300 just before Constantine comes and fundamentally changes how we understand ourselves as the church, what we call Christendom? It was a fundamental shift. But how does it do that? It grew like crazy. And to answer the question, you have to factor in one, they didn't have buildings like we have them. They had a few, you could trace back, meeting houses, but there were houses gutted, made into meeting halls, confiscated in persecution or destroyed. They didn't have legal status. They were persecuted. then their 501c3s. They were, marginal religion in that school. They didn't have the Bible, the New Testament particularly, and there was fragments being passed around the empire at the time. They didn't have seeker-sensitive services, internet, youth groups, all the stuff we think we need to get it on, and yet they managed to do it against the odds. So how did they do that? That was the question. And that's what the question that I had to grapple with, because I felt my life was determined by it. It's just one of those moments, bro, when they kind of, wow, this is my life. And I had to sit out. And the question I tried to figure out was this once off? Is it they were living off the smoke of the resurrection? It was the first kind of generation or so after the number of generations after Jesus. Is this just a freak of history, or is this normative for the ecclesia, for the church? And so I began to look elsewhere for this form. So this is the exponential form. So, the kind of hyperbolic growth curve. And so we begin to look in history for that kind of curve where it takes place. It does happen in Western history. It's happening all over the world at the moment in phenomenal ways. But in the West, it does happen on occasion. And every time it does, it changes the world. So early Methodism would be a good example of that. But anyway, so I wanted to choose something contemporary. And so I chose to study something of the Chinese underground church movement as much as one could study it. I began to, dig into that story. Christianity in China had been there for 2,000 years. Apostle Thomas brings it into the East, creates the Orthodox churches. From there, Nestorian and all the other expressions of Christianity begin to emerge. It's there for 2,000 years. But the most consistent form of Christianity at the time of Mao Zedong's revolution was what Christendom, as the European powers colonized China, all of them were there. They brought all their national churches with them. So there were Baptists, there were Catholics, there were, Anglicans, you name them. We were Lutherans, all there, kind of doing mission and bringing our ecclesia with us, which I frame like that, the kind of institutional version of the church with a spire on it. You can't quite do that. Anyway, so they really, I think it showed me something very significant, China, because under the conditions of persecution, so when Mao Zedong comes to power, he outlaws Christianity and he deinstitutionalized it literally radically. In a matter of 1 or 2 years, it's gone. Everything we knew about the church is gone. So the church's buildings are confiscated. Leaders like you and me are throats cut in public. And this is what happens to you if you want to follow Jesus, right? And otherwise, other leaders are sent into prison, jail to work for the rest of their lives. And foreign missionaries cast out, Bible banned. And then what is left now is about 2 million peasants at the time of 1950. And he tells them, if you dare gather, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to crush you. Be gone. And he begins to initiate what is a terrifying state-sponsored persecution. And under those conditions, bro, the Chinese church grows from 2 million in 1950 to upwards to 120 million, best estimates now, 70 or so years later. And there's the same phenomenon beginning to take place, the exponential growth curve. But I think, for me, bro, I'd say this, China actually is, I guess, even more important for us in some ways than the early church. And the reason for that is to say that they had the church that we know it for so long. That's removed, and under those conditions, it discovers resources in itself that in the end it becomes, and I'll say this technically, as scholarly, phenomenologically, if you study the phenomena of both the early church in China and other ones in between, the phenomena is precisely the same, which leads me to this idea of DNA. And DNA is like, well, you and I have got 32 chromosomes, we're humans, right? We're different, but the DNA keeps our character in play, our distinctives, but we're also human. So we remain human, thankfully. Um, I'm working on that to become a better human being. But that's not my DNA I've got to work at, but you know what I'm saying? Um, so yeah, DNA is a very profound thing. And so I asked that question, how did they do that? Early church China, every day for 3 years. As a matter of discipline, I would read, study, interview, research, every day, make little notes every day. And then finally, that moment of insight and truth, if you love something long enough, bro, it reveals itself to you. I
Yeah.
loved that question. I
Yeah, that's
wanted
good.
to know it, loved it,
Yeah.
and boom. And I think it was given to me, bro. And I feel this deep within my calling is to steward that into the world, you know. Because the idea of the forgotten ways, what I call in the book the latent potentials, I think lies dormant, forgotten in the basement or in the attic, whatever. We've forgotten it, but it can be recovered under certain conditions, and it can be recovered without persecution by actually focusing and recovering these. Because Jesus designed us for will transformation and movement, and therefore I think that the intrinsic design is already there. It's
Yeah.
just been suppressed or forgotten. And so hence the idea of recovering these elements of mDNA.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm with you on that, by the way. I don't think it's that we pray against persecution or that we don't want it. Um, I've I've recently been playing with this idea that I don't think that we were that maybe you could speak into this. This is a left turn, by the way. Left turn. Um, I, I I was talking to my wife the other day and I was like, I don't know that Jesus calls us to suffer. I think what he calls us to is resistance, and resistance ultimately leads to suffering. He calls us to resist empire, to resist, formation of clinging to power. He calls us to resist all these things that eventually the empire, the institutions, the systems go, we're going to bring that suffering to you. Um, but it's that resistance and that willingness to go, what if we went after these elements in this way? They are resistance type elements
Yeah,
ultimately because they're
yeah,
very different than the predominant system that wants us to box
yeah,
everything up.
yeah. Yes. And even beyond resistance, because I think that's absolutely true for our age, particularly, and temptations that, come with the prevailing system. But actually, these are ways to overcome it. Um, that each one of these elements are in themselves, as we'll share, they in themselves are ways to embody a different way of being to our current way of understanding ourselves, but that actually, I think, more truly represent what Jesus intended. And Jesus has designed us, as I said, for world transformation. So the church, he says, the gates of hell will not prevail against us. That means we're not a defensive body, just resisting. We are, but we're not just that. We are advancing body, and the gates of hell do not prevail against our advances. And that God intended us, Jesus intended his ecclesia, the church, to be the transformative agency in the world. And this, I think, gets us much closer to that intrinsic design because it gives us the mechanisms by which we can get there.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's jump through all six. I know we don't want this to be a full lecture or anything, but I also want people to have like a framework for the next several episodes where we'll get into each of them in more robust, expansive ways. But just to build the frame, let's talk about all six and I'll interrupt you with questions, or I'll just enjoy listening to you talk and you can just walk
Oh,
through all
gosh,
six. So
again, you can roll your eyes. Oh my gosh, here he goes again.
you're the
Um,
self-proclaimed Lord of the long answer. So
I am.
we'll
So,
do our
yes.
best to not do
I was going
that.
to say to the listener, he's prepping you guys to say, like, he's going to slap me around if I go on too long.
I will not do
That's what he
that.
was saying. It was
I
just
have
kind of a very kind
I
way
have
of saying,
too much respect for you to do that.
you can slap me around. If anyone can, you can, maybe.
Well, walk us through each of these elements and just what you mean by each of
Okay.
them.
Okay. So again, you will be exploring these more deeply. But I would argue, and again, I love a whiteboard. I ain't got one here. He stopped me from having one. But you've got to try and imagine this as a kind of a matrix of 6 elements. At the center of the matrix, the center of this system, is this idea called Jesus is Lord. I would argue is one of the key elements. In fact, it is the singular key element because it sets what I call character and content for the entire movement. It sets the frame or the basic foundational idea that kind of generates movement and maintains its integrity over time. If you lose this element, the character changes. And this is what's happened to us, I believe. So Jesus is Lord is, on the one side of the equation, you've got the Lord, underline that. And this brings up what the Bible would call the sovereignty of God, the kingship of God over all creation, the Lord and creator of all things. A powerful idea called monotheism, which created 3 religions, by the way, which the overwhelmingly predominant religions in the world. Judaism, small still, but very influential, Christianity and Islam are monotheistic religions. Where it comes again, so it's a big idea. And Jesus' favorite topic, but we'll come back to that. Jesus, the fact you name that with Jesus in front of it changes the character again. So Brian is Lord is a pretty cool place. I think I'd live there. But I'm suggesting your wife's going to tell me, not so much, not all the time, okay?
That's right.
And but it's cool. If I said Hitler's Lord, well, that's not so cool because the name you name in front of it changes everything. So I would argue that what Jesus Lord gives us is a worldview in 3 words. It's a whole worldview and a whole way of seeing that kind of is a kind of a doorway into the knowledge of God. It's not the only thing you can say about God, but you don't come to the Father except through the Son. Is the way, the truth, and life. So it's the doorway into a greater knowledge of God, and it becomes the defining center. This is critically important and sets the character content of the entire movement. We'll come back at that. The next one is discipleship and disciple making, and this is the way we interpret Jesus as Lord into our lives. It's how we accept Jesus my Savior, but He's also my Lord. And it's the way I receive Him. It's the way that Jesus gets into me. Discipleship is the way that Jesus gets into me and from me into the church, the world. That is, Jesus is me. And it's the way I take it seriously. And discipleship, therefore, is the process of becoming more and more and more and more and more and more like Jesus. Every day, every year, more like Jesus. So I'm modeling my life on Jesus, which the Bible calls conformation. And again, we'll explore this more fully in the next kind of podcast, but it's how we index ourselves to Jesus Christ. And this is very important. So discipleship, doing the same kinds of things that Jesus did for the same kinds of reasons that He did them. Taking Jesus very seriously. Disciple making, on the other hand, is about cooking that into the system so that it's unavoidable. It's not optional. It's not just a class of, 7 heads of doctrine, 12 heads of doctrine, and then always ends up with tithing, interestingly. And then you can become a member. That's not what discipleship is. It might incorporate that, but it's not that. It's really making it unavoidable, this life of continual attenuation to Jesus Christ. So that's discipleship, disciple making. Yeah. So you want me to keep going?
Yeah, keep it rolling, man. It's helpful to hear them all together like this.
Okay. So the next one would be, and there's no particular order at this point. I would say the first 2 hang out together very strongly.
Absolutely.
But the order doesn't flow. They're all significant and all are necessary. So the next one I use is missional incarnational impulse. And it's, I know it's my language, but the idea of incarnational forms of mission. Mission means missio is go out, missio is sent, missile, sending, and it's deeply rooted in who God is, missionary God. Jesus, Father, send the Son, The Father sends the Son. The Father, Son send the Spirit. Spirit is missionary. So it's deeply rooted in God. And then he sends us. So we have sent people. Deep in our identity, sentness, missio. Incarnation is how God sends the Son. How he effectively does the mission is to incarnate into, a local setting and embody a certain understanding of the word. So the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And this is deeply within theology, but it also informs our methodology. And so we would say we ourselves, following this pattern, we go out, we go deep. We go out, we go deep, just like God did. But it's a pattern that the church adopts in extending, and you begin to see that swoosh begin to take place, going out, going deep, multiplying, like that. So it's critically important. And yeah, challenges a lot of our assumptions about how we think of church and attractional and all that stuff. Next one.
Yep. APEST culture.
APEST culture. So APEST is simply the Ephesians 4 typology of ministry of the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. These come as a package deal. You can't cherry pick. In the ascension, Jesus gives these to the church. And I believe it's his own functions and purposes and ministries that he bequeaths to the body of Christ. And so it might be attained, it says Ephesians 4:14, to attain to the fullness of Christ, 4:12. So somewhere in there. To the fullness of Christ. The fullness of Christ is associated with APEST. Marcus Barth, a brilliant commentator, Barth, says, APEST are the modes of Christ's royal presence in the church. It's the way that Jesus is present in and through his people. Whoa!
Yeah, amen.
And so, but the problem is we have churches that basically say, what's an apostle? They have no idea. Prophets in the Bible, evangelists, well, we accept them now. We do accept them now, but they don't get titles. The only one who gets titles is the pastor and the professor. And so we only ended up with 2 of the 5. And the problem is we're trying to do Jesus' ministry with only 2 of his 5 functions. It doesn't work. And it's very dysfunctional and very unfaithful, because it says it comes as a package deal in the ascension. Ascension, you take it seriously. So that's important. Never been a movement that didn't have 5-fold form. Never happens. It does not happen. I can't say that more strongly as I can now. So you need all 5 to become a movement. Next one is what you guys are masterful at in KCU, is organic systems. And so this is how movements organize themselves and organize and activate their mission, instrumentalize, make it purposeful. So movements resist the temptation to centralize and go hierarchical in power. They decentralize power and function, push it outwards. They use networking dynamics across the system so that it can go really wide, because networking can go very far, especially in the age of the internet, as you guys can do very well. Each part can reproduce the whole. Everyone's a player. You're organizing differently. And look, it's not sexy, but a lot of people try and diss this. But if you don't pay attention to organic systems, organization, should I say, it will pay attention to you and will always undermine you if you don't do it well. And so if you want to be a movement, you have to restructure towards being a movement, again, which I think you guys do masterfully well. The final one is called liminality and communitas. And again, I'm sorry for the words.
Hey, I have to interrupt you here because I have to coach people on this all the time. These are not actually made up words.
No,
they're not. Sociological terms.
They are. And and I do make up words though, but what I'm trying to do is to find, I was looking at the nature of community and relationships in movements, of even, let's say, a small group or a movement like the Back to Jerusalem movement in China, a crazy group of people, we do 2 million of them, by the way. No headquarters, by the way. Don't pay salaries.
Yeah.
And they're prepared to suffer and die for the faith. 2 million associated. So there's the organic systems play. But when you're looking at that kind of what dynamics going on there, the kind of relationships. Normal, the way we use community doesn't fit. And so there's came upon this term communitas. It's, as you know, it's a sociological term. Liminality is the conditions of risk, danger, ordeal, challenge, adventure, disorientation, marginalization, disruption, etc. Classically, what we might term, a very technical term called an oh shit moment, that precipitates a new way of being. It's a technical term. Suck it up. And communitas is the form of community that arises out of the context of ordeal, challenge, danger, risk, and liminality. It's when you think about a sports team or a military unit facing fire, you're bonded together because you have to have each other's backs. You have to love each other in a different way. You don't have to feel anything about that, but you have to, and that comradeship is critically important. And this ability to engage in risk and adventure together is very, very much an aspect of movement. Then you can see this in martyrdom movements. Chinese would be a good example, but early church definitely as well. So all six are necessary. So there's the six. Jesus' law, discipleship and disciple making, missional incarnational impulse, APES culture, organic systems, liminality, communitas. 6 elements, all cooking. And I would argue, and this is the important side of why we call it the forgotten ways, or the 6 elements come together. All are necessary to be a movement. If you take one out, you'll be good. I mean, if you're doing all the thing, but you're not doing disciple making, well, actually, if you're not doing disciple making,
Yeah.
if you're not doing disciple making, you won't do anything else.
Yeah,
So let's leave that there. But let's say if you got disciple making cooked and very well, but you're not doing organic systems, you're not reproducing and multiplying, or you're not doing APEST, you're never going to be a movement. You'll be good, better.
Yeah.
Discipleship is great, but
Yeah.
it's necessary but not sufficient. So you need all 6 to make it cook. And these are high leverage areas, which we'll explore in this series, where you can actually begin to activate these in the local setting, take out the blockers that are blocking these and activate these in the local settings, and everything changes.
Yeah, you're actually beginning to touch on the last question I want to hit on for a few brief moments.
Hint, yes.
On that idea that all 6 are necessary, because I don't disagree with you because you wrote the book and have taught on this forever, and the idea that, you could do 4 out of 5 and you'd be better, but these elements are interdependent. So if you touch one, you impact the whole. I think that's like a direct quote from
That's
you.
the idea. Yeah.
So yeah, I just want you to unpack that a little bit more of if you touch one, you impact the whole, and why it's dangerous for us to skip 1 or 2 or whatever.
Yeah. One of our great temptations, bro, in the Western church, or just anyway, to be very pragmatic people, is to simply think, oh, we only need to do disciple making. The problem is you can do disciple making, now they make a lot of Jesus-y kind of people in the world. That's good, man. But unless you organize differently than the current form of church, all you've got is consumers. We're perfectly designed to produce what we're currently producing. In other words, you have to restructure, so that takes in organic systems into play. You have to have the ministry capacities to both initiate and sustain movements, so that brings in APEST into play. You can't do it without APEST. And I would argue that, so again, the living systems idea is very important to think non-linear. And this is a discipline, I would argue, that leaders have to learn. That your body is a good example of it. It's a whole lot of systems activating all together at the same time. System is a series of interdependent and interrelated parts. Touch the one, you impact the whole. If one goes down, think about if your heart goes down, doesn't matter how good your mind is, you're going down, right? Because it's your mind doesn't do what the heart can do. So it's a system, and you have to think system. And I know it's not, but it's only 6. It's not going to blow your mind, but it will blow your mind, because you'll begin to see church in a very different way, not one-dimensionally. And by the way, just an example on how this plays out. In China, the church goes to scale. Russia, under the same conditions, it did not. So what's the difference? Well, the Russian church becomes a persecuted church, goes underground, and they pray and they do discipleship underground, and they suffer for it. But they didn't get any of the other factors together, so they didn't do anything. They pretty much almost passed away. They barely survived, the 60 or so years of Marxist oppression. The reason why is that they only had one or two of those elements cooking, and they never went to China. Gets them all six, and it corresponds to what you see in the New Testament. So mDNA is latent in the system. You've got to be aware of the aspects of the system to bring it forth, and that's really what this series, I think, ought to kind of be double-clicking. Yeah. You've got it in you. Jesus has given you everything you need to get the job done. You don't even need to go to Harvard Business School for it. You've got it already. Just activate it.
Yeah.
But you have to be a disciple to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to give you one more question. You can get on a little soapbox here if you want. What do you hope people do with mDNA in this current season? Why does it matter that we return to the forgotten ways now? From Alan's heart, how you want to answer that?
Yeah, well, because I think the church Christianity in the West has come to a decisive point. It's actually been going for since the Enlightenment. Christianity is on the decline because it's lost its power dynamic. It had certain power over society, and that was changed, create the secular society. But we've been in decline ever since, and we're now in parts of Europe seeing the last generations of biblical Christianity in our time. So it's very significant. We are dying rapidly. That form has come to an end. What got us to this point in history ain't going to get us further. And I would argue that the original intention was us to be a movement. So it's an opportunity to feel that threat and to activate our capacities that Jesus designed us for. So, like I said, the answer's there. You just have to look differently at how we think of ourselves and go on a learning journey, which hopefully this part will be. And read the book. I know it's not an easy book to read, and but that's part of the challenge. Is that if it's easy, then you're just going to more or less agree with it. But the task of a writer like me is to wound you to wound the reader, and to put an X at the thought of at the basis of our thought, to kind of create new patterns of thinking that are ancient, by the way. It's not new, it's ancient, but they're forgotten.
Yeah, so good. Man, thanks, Alan, for framing this conversation up. I always think it's helpful to create the structure and the mindset so that the rest of these episodes fit into something. So over the next several weeks, we'll be exploring each of these elements in mDNA a little more specifically. We'll also be talking to organizations, leaders who have spent significant amount of time with one or two of these and have created training frameworks to help with this. So that'll be a good introduction to walk with others who are a little further down the road, can help you implement these more effectively. So we just say if today has stirred something in you and you're thinking, I want to do something next, well, one, share the episode with somebody who's also considering like, man, I want the church to get back to its roots and what I read about in the New Testament. Have a conversation around this. Secondly, you can take the mDNA strengths assessment at huntermovements.com to explore how these 6 elements show up in your own life, places where you can begin to grow and move toward these in more intentional ways. Join the conversation at community.huntermovements.com. And we just say thanks for listening and hope you'll join us next time. See ya.